One of the things that we often don't talk about, and we have at this conference, is youth and homelessness. But talking about kids in transitions, uh, students in schools, foster children aging out of the system. This next panel has some great ideas and some firsthand experience. And so please help me welcome Carolyn Fowler, Tara Ford, Rachel Stein, and Iziko Calderon.
Good morning. My name is Tara Ford. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a lawyer with Public Counsel. And we really just want to thank the Sanders Institute for allowing us to be here today to talk about homelessness among children and youth in foster care. We have so much we want to share with you. Our plan today is to talk about the problem of homelessness and youth among foster children and youth and some tools for addressing it. We're going to discuss foster youth's experience navigating housing barriers while in care. We will look specifically at the impact of homelessness on educational outcomes for foster children and youth. And throughout, we are going to describe some tools to protect foster youth rights to placement and services, to improve placement stability, and access to trauma-responsive services. We're going to be talking about impact litigation, 2 cases, Ocean S and Kevin S. We're also going to be talking about implementing guaranteed income programs for youth, implementing the Housing First model, including youth voice and choice in designing and implementing housing solutions, and using housing choice vouchers to improve housing stability for transition-age youth who are exiting foster care. And we're really optimistic that we're going to have time for questions at the end. Preventing homelessness among foster youth is critical to meaningful child welfare reform. If we're going to prevent homelessness for foster children and youth, we need to have a uniform and expansive definition of the term unhoused. And for children and youth in foster care, that must include, for example, youth being asked to sleep in offices, or languishing in hospitals, sleeping in cars, or couch surfing with friends. All of these youth are unhoused. As with education, much of the data related to housing and placement for foster youth does not reflect the actual scope of the problem because too often we're just not tracking when children and youth are without a placement. Yet, foster youth of all ages in out-of-home care have a legal right to placement and supportive services based on their individual needs. And foster youth have the right to placement that is the placement in the least restrictive, most home-like setting. Alarmingly, violations of these rights have become normative in many places, especially among older foster youth. In 2021, John Burton, Advocates for Youth, conducted a survey of 598 youth aged 18 to 24 who were currently or formerly in foster care in California, and found that 66% were formerly unhoused. That's 66%. It should go without saying, we need to transform how we think about our responsibilities towards system-impacted children, youth, and families. Before we move on, it's important to note that all of the named plaintiffs in the Ocean S lawsuit are young people of color. This fact reflects the systemic racism inherent in the foster care system. And we want to acknowledge that there's a critical conversation happening now among youth and family advocates around whether the foster care system should be reformed or abolished altogether. Our focus in the cases that we're discussing today is to ensure that young people who have already been caught in the system are not deprived of their basic rights to safe, stable, and appropriate housing and supportive services. While Public Counsel uses a variety of methods to create system change, including policy advocacy at the state and local level, we've learned that legislative fixes alone are often not sufficient to protect the rights of the vulnerable communities. So we use class action litigation as another way to vindicate our clients' rights. I want to talk about the Kevin S. lawsuit that we brought in New Mexico in 2018. Kevin S. was brought on behalf of 13 children against the foster care and Medicaid departments in New Mexico. our clients wanted to make sure that children and youth in foster care had essential care, stable placements, and community-based mental health treatment. The experience of the Kevin S. named plaintiffs demonstrates some key points about how foster care is a pathway to homelessness. But I want to back up just for a minute. As a new lawyer decades ago, I was appointed to represent a baby who had been removed from her family. On my first home visit, I asked the foster parent how the baby was doing, and the foster parent said the baby was really unsettled. And then she said she was heartbroken because she didn't know that the meals the family cooked or the laundry detergent that the family used, the kind of smells that might provide comfort to that baby. That foster parent was schooling me early that when we remove children from their families, there is a harm. And in interviewing foster youth in 2019, Chapin Hall found that youth often identify their first experience of homelessness as removal from their families. From our clients in Kevin S., we learned that children in state custody in New Mexico, on top of being removed from their families, were repeatedly re-traumatized by being uprooted and cycled in and out of short-term emergency placements, such as homeless shelters. They are sleeping in offices and residential treatment centers. Their behavioral health needs are not being addressed, and Native American children's rights under the Indian Child Welfare Act were violated. As many of you may know, Congress passed ICWA in 1978 because of the high rate of forced removal of Native American children from their homes. In 2020, we entered a settlement with New Mexico, and the parties agreed to a framework to create a trauma-responsive system of care. We recognized that the governmental changes would take time, and we sequenced the actions the state was agreeing to take with a runway of several years. Even with a shared understanding of the changes that need to occur, implementation of that settlement has been significantly delayed. From this, we've learned some important lessons. Designing systems to meet the needs of children and youth and their families has to be trauma responsive, and that requires a workforce that is trained and supported to center families, children, and youth. Program and funding silos hurt children and youth in foster care, and Kevin S. requires the child welfare system and the Medicaid system to work together in new ways. And what we have learned in New Mexico and nationally is that the Medicaid system must expand a behavioral health workforce so that there are community-based services available to families when they need them. Leadership at all levels of government need access to real-time data to effectively oversee programs and services. And changing our systems of care will require meaningful engagement of youth, their families, and community-based stakeholders so that we can invest in solutions that work for them. Finally, there must be a firm commitment to accountability and quality improvement. Setting and meeting outcome benchmarks is imperative if we're going to see the change that foster children, youth, and their families urgently need.
Let me get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Greetings, Carolyn Fowler. I work at LAUSD for Dr. George McKenna on education policy and community relations. So I know many of you know me from another life, but that's what I'm going to speak to you about today. Dr. Howard from UCLA gave a great overview of some of the issues that are going on from the perspective of systems. I'm here today to talk to you about what's really going on at the ground level. Let me change this. Tell me. I thought it's important to start with some critical data, and I hope you can see all this. The three things I'm going to focus on is, first of all, the number of students that are experiencing homelessness. 13,946 is what's showing here. That's probably, as Dr. Howard mentioned, a very low number, since all we do is get the data from the families as we go see them, or the students. And as he's so aptly stated before, they're mainly told, particularly in the immigrant families, not to disclose the fact that they are homeless. It's a little easier to detect with the foster care students. But as you see, this many students, and then you go over to many times because of the transition and the movement that they have, mobility, 420 students, we can't even tell you where they are today because they don't have to tell us they're going to another school, another state, etc. So we can easily lose track of them. The other thing I wanted to point out is the number of students in foster care, 4,333. Now that we can keep a more accurate count on because of our relationships with the county and other organizations. So that number is much lower in terms of getting out of the system and how we can't see them. But I also wanted to highlight particularly the chronic absenteeism. 129,000 students out of 440 students. When we miss that many days of class, there's no way they're going to be on track with their education. So I think it's important to understand some of the difficulties that we have and trying to maintain the importance of attending class in schools. Within the department, we have a homeless department that specifically focuses on the homeless students. And they have a pretty good handle once identified with what partners they should take care of, whether it's mental health, whether it's support. Some of these students don't even have a way to eat every day if they don't come to school, and that's what's important for people to know. We have a whole department on student health and human services. So it's kind of like we're running businesses within the business of educating our students. We have a big I Attend, based on that chronic absenteeism, we have a huge I Attend program where staff goes out and tries to understand what is the root cause of the absence. So sometimes it's these students are older and they have to watch their siblings because the parents are at work. The other thing is as grandparents, and if they either fall to illness or something, they can't get them to school. So one of the things we've done recently is added transportation. Any parent or guardian can ask and request transportation to the school. So trying to minimize the student missing school. We also have 19 federally qualified wellness centers on 19 of our campuses. So not only is that for students, but that can be for the community as well. These are the things that we're trying to do to get as many students to school every day as possible. We also have parent centers at pretty much every school, so parents or guardians or another relative, because we're finding we have to do that, aunts, uncles, to come and they can learn how to access the systems to keep up with and track the students, how they're doing with their records. We also have a student board member, which is another source of us to gain information on what the students want so we can determine the policies that will help them. This student rep is not just, they get to vote. We have an annual, it's usually a senior, and the students elect their student representative. That's very important as well. It's who they trust to represent their needs. The transportation I mentioned briefly, I'll come back to that in a little while. We also have a packet that I put together for you. You can get one off the back table. We have a whole Know Your Rights program. So for foster care students, for homeless students, what resources they can access. And this is online as well, so you can go to lausd.net and ask for that as well if you don't want to take a packet. Let me go to the next slide. So there are a lot of strategies and legislation that's happening to support our transitional students. The California Senate Bill 333 by Dave Cortese, he is proposing, well, he's calling it SOAR, but he's proposing a bill that would give students as they graduate for at least 5 months guaranteed income of $1,000 to $1,500. Now, I know they say we have no money, but we've got to think about these students that can fall into the cracks because they had no support leaving high school and no idea of what it's like. And we have many of them today. So I think that's a pretty good piece of legislation. We also have on record a Senate Bill 98. Currently, because funding is an issue, Alex, I hope you're listening. Currently, we have, we're asking for enrollment-based funding. Today, it's attendance. And you can see from what's happening, if we're based on attendance, how little that, how dramatically that could impact the funding that we have available to support these students. So I think it's important that we pay attention. I just had a meeting with the city attorney, Heidi Feldstein, last week. She is proposing some legislation to assist our students with human trafficking. This is not something we love to talk about, but many people, parents, the community is not aware how huge a problem this is. Right now, she's focusing on the Figueroa corridor, but we have some schools in that area, but there are other schools that have similar problems, and so the legislation that needs to pass to help and curb these incidents are important. I'm trying to remember what else I wanted to talk about right there. We do have a quarterly collaborative that meets. Some of our partners are the LASA, the Union Rescue Mission, San Fernando Valley Rescue Mission, DPSS. Some of our partners in the faith-based community that were mentioned earlier in terms of housing, USC, and the LA-LACO, the County of Education. I think what's important also, let me just go to this next slide. Transportation that we talked about earlier. I'm very proud Dr. McKenna took the very lead. If you're not familiar, there's a South Los Angeles Transportation and Empowerment Zone Committee. Right on the very early on, I questioned, why are we paying students? I watch students being denied getting on the bus to go to school. So I'm happy to report that partnering with, I don't know if Denny's here today, Denny Zane and Move On, and Eli Lipman, and the city of Los Angeles, we now have free transportation. The kids can get tap cards and ride throughout. And it's educational as well. On their spare time, they can go to the museums, they can go to the library, they can go and learn what's going on in their, some of these kids have never been outside of their community. And so that gives them no excuses now not to get to school. Let me see. And so some of the funding that we have had because of the homeless expansion, you can see there. We were able to, so when we asked for this bond money, believe me, it goes to a great purpose. We've been able to add more PSA counselors. Mental health is critical, especially coming out of the pandemic. We find there are still students that really, it hit them hard. They lost sometimes their mother, their father, their aunts, their uncles, students that they were really close friends with. I don't think people really understand how that has impacted many of our youth. And what we're finding is there's still a lot of there's a lot of anger. And so we need people that can deal with that. There's a shortage, as you probably heard the other day, on mental health specialists. And so we've got to pick up the training for that as well, in terms of making sure that we have a safe environment for the students. We're looking at some mentorship programs in terms of who do you trust, so that every student has one person on that campus that they feel comfortable sharing information with. Many times that has really supported us in efforts to defraying the fights that happen on campus, deterring outside people coming onto the campus that plan to do students harm. So I think that's important as well. And that's my final slide, but I wanted to tell you some more information in terms of as far as housing. We recently, a week ago, opened a housing development, Sun King in Sun Valley. It opened as a permanent supportive housing project because we had many families of students there that were unhoused. And so LAUSD partnered with Many Mansions. It's a nonprofit developer. And this isn't our first project. We have some others, but we have a committee looking at how we can use some of the land that we already own to further develop for our students and our staff and families. that whether they're unhoused or just the cost is unbearable. So our staff is not traveling a long ways. I think I'll close with that and be open for questions. Don't forget to get the handout, and look forward to more discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Could you change the section, please? Thank you.
Okay. What time? How are we doing on time?
Hello, everyone. My name is Iziko. Pleasure to be here in front of all. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a cross-organizational consultant. I'm a cross-organizational consultant. Yeah. I'm a former foster youth, so I'm here to speak on behalf of my community. So, foster youth with lived experience housing barriers, many housing barriers in LA County. The factors that contribute to this are youth are expected to meet the needs of housing providers instead of providers meeting the needs of foster youth. The lack of person-centered case planning it kind of looks like, a lot of people don't really understand that it looks like having the youth fit into the housing requirements instead of like them fitting into what the youth need. There are rigid program rules, like having to meet a caseworker 3 times a week, plus a growing youth's fluctuating schedule is kind of not very helpful. The lack of process for providing reasonable accommodations. Like imagine having to need some type of accommodation that is out of your control and there is no process. So you never get to meet, like your needs never get met. And the county's state failure to provide minimally adequate placement array. Sorry about that. Yeah, the lived experience of foster youth navigating housing barriers in LA, populations of TAY, transition-aged youth, are more likely to experience homelessness and severe housing instability. Youth who are LGBTQIA are part of that. Identities that are discriminated against or disrespected, especially since some housing options are faith-based. And LGBTQ people have religious trauma, and it can trigger a trauma response. Youth who have disabilities or special needs, there are very real ableist ideas and qualifications in the interview process in housing. And it's just not helpful. Youth of color, racial disparities span from a lack of cultural education awareness and sometimes to blatant racism. And youth with intersecting identities like myself. I'll pass it to Rachel. Thank you.
I'm Rachel. Thank you for, can you hear me okay? My pronouns are she, her. I'm an attorney with public counsel. To set the context for our discussion of Ocean S, which is the next impact litigation case that we're going to be discussing today, I just wanted to give you a little brief background about the extended foster care program. Before 2008, youth generally were not permitted to remain in foster care after their 18th birthday, even if they did not have the family or financial resources that they needed to support them after they aged out. This led to high rates of homelessness and other poor outcomes among young people who remained in care until age 18. Recognizing that foster youth needed housing and support when they were transitioning to adulthood, Congress passed the Fostering Connections to Success in Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008. That change in the law allowed states to access federal funding to extend the benefits and the protections of foster care up until age 21. Congress determined that any state that receives federal funding to implement an extended foster care program must allow youth to remain in foster care under the responsibility of the state. Despite the existence of an extended foster care program in California, many transition-age foster youth struggle to have their basic needs met. A recent study from Berkeley found that more than 1/3 of youth at age 19 and 21 in care reported not having enough money for clothes or shoes. At age 21, a quarter of the young people did not have enough money for rent. Black, Latinx, LGBTQ+ youth, and young women were more likely to experience economic hardship during their transitions. And in working with individual young people who are in foster care in LA County, we at Public Counsel have seen that their rights are frequently violated, resulting in them becoming unhoused while they're in care. Next slide, please. So our position in the Ocean S lawsuit is that all youth in foster care have a special relationship with the state and the county. And this special relationship extends to adult foster youth who are 18 to 21. The government has an ongoing legal responsibility to provide adult foster youth with safe housing and necessary supportive services. For many years, we at Public Counsel and our colleagues at the Alliance for Children's Rights have been working to address homelessness among older foster youth in LA County through direct representation of young people who are in care, as well as policy advocacy at the local and state level. Unfortunately, homelessness among our clients has persisted, and we realized that we needed to use impact litigation as a tool to bring about systemic reform. This past summer, 6 young people in foster care filed a class action lawsuit against various state and county agencies and officials who are responsible for the administration of the LA County foster care system and the Medicaid program. The complaint challenges the LA County foster care system's persistent failure to provide transition-age foster youth, which we're defining as 16 to 21-year-olds, with the housing and the services to which they are legally entitled. The goals of the lawsuit are to ensure that all transition-age youth in foster care have safe, stable, and appropriate housing, that they have adequate notice and due process protections related to denials or push out from their placements, that they have legally compliant case plans and transition planning that's tailored to meet their individual needs, that they have access to Medicaid services that they're entitled to, and we seek to end disability discrimination related to the provision of housing and services like Iziko was just talking about. We're seeking to end interference with the family association rights of transition-age youth who are expecting and parenting. The county and the state defendants in this case dispute that they are violating the rights of our clients, and they're actually seeking to dismiss our entire case. The state defendant's position is that despite their oversight responsibility for child welfare, the county is solely responsible for administering LA County's foster care system, and the state bears no liability for our clients' homelessness and other challenges. The county defendant's position is that they have no special relationship with the plaintiffs, and in fact, they state that there's no entitlement to housing in extended foster care. The hearing on the defendant's motion to dismiss is scheduled for this coming week. Next slide, please. Now I want to take a step back and talk about what would it look like to design a system that was actually targeted to meet the needs of transition-age foster youth. In designing programs and services for transition-age youth, we need to account for the developmental and psychological realities of adolescence. We need to keep in mind that fundamental brain development takes place during adolescence, including the development of functions that govern reasoning, decision-making, judgment, and impulse control. We also need to account for the needs of young people who have complex trauma. Both before and during their time in care, transition-age foster youth are highly likely to have experienced complex trauma, and by that we mean that they have been exposed to multiple traumatic events, often interpersonal in nature, as well as the impact of this exposure. When this type of trauma is not addressed, it often substantially impacts emotional self-regulation, concentration, sleep, and cognition. Systems need to be designed to accommodate the needs of youth with complex trauma so that they can actually access placement and services. We also need to account for the needs of expecting and parenting youth. They need safe, stable, and appropriate housing, not just for themselves, but for their children. And to preserve their family unit, they need support to services that are specifically targeted to help them support, maintain, and develop their relationships to their children. Next slide, please. In designing this type of system for transition-age youth, one of the interventions that can help reduce youth homelessness is the implementation of a housing-first model, which promotes housing stability, well-being, and social inclusion. Some of our speakers yesterday talked about this model. Housing-first programs are rooted in the belief that everyone has the right to adequate housing, and individuals are better able to move forward with their lives if they're first housed. For a youth housing-first model, some of the core principles would include the right to housing with no preconditions, youth choice, youth voice, and self-determination, positive youth development and wellness orientation, individualized client-driven supports and with no time limits, social inclusion, and community integration. This type of model has a strong evidence base and has proved to be highly effective in addressing the needs of chronically unhoused adults, particularly those with significant mental health needs. Housing first interventions have been shown to have an 80% success rate in promoting housing stability versus a 40% effective rate for more traditional housing models. There is research supporting the use of this type of model with transition-age youth. Unfortunately, LA County's foster care system has not implemented this type of program for transition-age youth in foster care. To implement this type of program in a way that actually maintains fidelity to the model, you would need a few things. You need effective training and ongoing coaching of providers, social workers, and county and state leadership to implement the basic principles of the model. And as many youth advocates have recognized, we also need a cultural shift in how providers, child welfare staff, and administrators view transition-age youth and understand their needs. We need to shift from the lens of allocating limited scarce benefits to guaranteeing basic resources. And rather than putting the onus on young people to navigate these complex systems, government agencies have to take responsibility and be held accountable for ensuring that young people in extended foster care have unconditional access to basic resources as they enter adulthood, including housing, as well as healthcare, education, and financial security. And if you'd like to read more about the recommendations related to this cultural shift in child welfare, you can look at the report from the Youth Law Center, California Youth Connection, and the Institute for the Future, which is entitled On the Threshold of Change. Now I'm going to pass it back to Iziko to discuss another critical aspect of designing this type of system, which is youth choice and voice.
Hello again. All right, so now implementing youth voice and choice, right? So county and state must invite organizations led by people with lived experience to participate in decision-making regarding policy reforms. Orgs that grow and have youth leadership are the drivers for change and are exemplary in trusting the honest experience of youth who hold the knowledge to know where to better make policy changes for the future. The government must integrate youth in an authentic way, avoiding jargon along the way. It's very critical. County and state must hire people with lived experience into positions of power so that the future can take lead and accountability for what is to come, but also putting them in the position to mature through the environment, and with proper support, training, and supervision, they can prepare for adult life and contribute to the community. Youth-driven case planning. Social workers and probation officers must engage youth more effectively in the process of identifying placement and supportive services appropriate to youth's needs, and work to make the CFT process better and supportive effective for the youth. Engaging looks different for each individual, especially a growing youth. I must emphasize supporting youth's needs and not the actions needed to fit into the supportive requirements. Not everyone has the same case needs. Also, CFTs are sometimes held within the convenience and bias of supporting adults. Also, failing the main purpose of CFTs. Regardless of system involvement, there should be more emphasis on those currently experiencing unmet needs, lack of supports, and intersectionality. We really need to give the youth the opportunity to participate in anonymous surveys regarding their experiences. How else is DCFS going to be able to address the youth concerns or incompetence in a timely manner? Federal vouchers as a housing resource for TAE. Key components of foster youth to independence, FYI vouchers, Family Unification Program, FUP voucher programs. Rental assistance it's a rental assistance program that helps youth for 36 months, but may be extended. Supportive services provided by Child Welfare Agency to assist the youth person to their path of self-sufficiency. The eligibility looks like youth that were formerly in foster care will leave foster care within the next 90 days. The youth would be ages 18 to 24 and would be unhoused or at risk of becoming unhoused at the age of 16 or older. The key benefits of this is that it helps set youth up for the success in their education and employment goals and improves overall health by providing housing stability. This is an opportunity for government agencies to collectively serve an overlooked and valuable community, our future generation. There are challenges in accessing these vouchers in the administrative process. Applicants are being incorrectly told that they can't apply while they're in foster care, even if they are less than 90 days from exit. It involves lengthy and confusing application LISA process. Although the utilization rate has increased, vouchers are still being left on the table. John Burton Advocates for Youth report shows that the number of 54% from 870 in 2021 to more than 1,300 in 2023. Although competitive vouchers have increased, PEHA's housing authorities are not really utilizing non-competitive on-demand vouchers. As of October 1st, 2023, just 2 California counties have received a total of 28 FYI FUP vouchers through the on-demand process. The J-Base survey found that for the counties keeping a waiting list for youth waiting for the vouchers, those waiting lists increased from 280 in 2021 to 300 in 2023, but there is no waiting list for LA, so youth who have applied don't even get a follow-up. Strategies to increase the voucher utilization rates. Implementing more supports and incentives for landlords to participate is very important. Creating a co-signer program. We're youth, so we don't have a credit like spot on, and we just go homeless. Leveraging housing navigation and maintenance program funds to better support transition-aged youth in finding housing. Make the FYI voucher application process shorter and improve communication collaboration between DCFS and housing authorities. And DCFS should be very transparent about the application process, especially to youth. Housing authorities should access all 50 on-demand vouchers available each year. And yes, we can. The number of transition-age foster youth is relatively small. They have a right to placement and expanded Medicaid services. State and county governments collect federal dollars to serve this population, so we know who these youth are and we almost always know how to contact them. Effectively housing prevents future homelessness and improves educational outcomes. Thank you for your time.